You are listening to the 5 Acre Parables Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the 5 Acre Parables Podcast. It's been quite a while since we've recorded. I can't really remember, Andrew, how long has it been since we recorded? It feels like it's been months.
Long enough I've forgotten when it was.
Yeah. A lot of times we try to get a few episodes ahead on recording, and so even though the episodes are a little more spaced out, we kind of just do some block recording. So I feel like it's been almost 6 months, but it's a new year, and we are excited to be back and try to just get out a few more episodes. We've talked about doing it consistently, but you know us, it's hard to be consistent on anything. So we're going to try to make sure and get out a few episodes over the year just to keep up with it and continue to put out some content and try to work on improving ourselves at this whole thing. But as always, I'm always glad to be joined by my friend Andrew House. Say hi, Andrew.
Howdy, howdy.
All right. Our topic for tonight, we're kind of been, we've talked about this before in other contexts together and in our personal lives, but this idea, this phrase that pops up, buy once, cry once. Who did you hear that phrase from, Andrew, or have you just heard it around all your life?
Old people that were buying stuff that was too expensive a lot of the time.
Probably. We won't name any old people specifically in case they happen to be listening to the podcast. I've always heard it in the context of things you just don't want to have to replace.
Yeah.
And in homesteading, the problem with homesteading is you are, well, and this may open up a whole can of worms that we'll tackle on another day. But, a lot of people feel like, you got to go, if you're going to get a homestead, you got to go out and get 50 acres, and then you got to buy your tractor and buy all this stuff right off the bat. And 90% of people that want to tackle this, that's the reason why they don't get in it, is because the amount of money that they perceive as being necessary for the startup cost. So some of this stuff you need to get really creative if you want to do this. If you really truly want to do it, you kind of got to get creative. And I think we've talked about that before, some money saving stuff type things. And if we haven't, we'll have to cover it later together on this. But what are some things that you think, if you're thinking about buying something, about spending the money on this, what are some things you would recommend homesteaders not skimping out on or cheaping out on?
We are in the Ozarks, or I am in the Ozarks, and
I'm right on the edge.
Everything is hilly timber around here. If you end up with a piece of property like what I have, there are trees everywhere you want to do fun stuff that requires sunlight. You have to cut down the trees you don't want and be able to do whatever you want to do that requires sunlight. So I am, of course, being a lumberjack, going to say, don't skimp out and buy a super cheap chainsaw if you have a significant amount of chainsawing in your future. There's a tendency for people to buy, like, not to bash the poor little brand, but Poulan saw from Walmart for as cheap as they possibly can get one. They use it 2 or 3 times, and then, like, over the course of a year or two, there comes an event where they need it, and it won't start. And so at that point, you have to ask yourself, is it worth fixing? Or usually you go out and you buy another one. At that point, you're pretty much to the price point of buying a decent mid-range saw, lower mid-range saw that you could have bought in the first place. So if you have any significant amount of sawing in your future, buy at least a decent mid-range saw. It's going to set you back right now in the neighborhood of $500 at least. If you want to jump up a couple $100 into the low commercial range, that's also a really good idea. But do not buy a cheap chainsaw and then try to cut 15 cords of wood in a year and clear off 5 acres of timber.
Mm-hmm. And then what timber you do have remaining, coming from my background in volunteer firefighting, I mean, what timber you have remaining is going to fall over when you least expect it sometimes.
Yeah.
And so having a saw that you can start up and will start if you need to. We've known people that have been in situations where their driveway's blocked and they're sitting there racking that. You said pull on. I've seen a lot of people around my area buying the Ryobi ones.
Oh
I would
yeah.
not recommend any Ryobi chainsaws out of Home Depot.
Yeah.
Uh, throw out a couple brands, Andrew, and then we'll move on.
Uh, we are switching over to Huskies, Husqvarna at work, and I really am enjoying running them. We've ran Steels for years. It's an old good brand. It's on the more pricey side. I really like my Echo. My Echo is finally on its deathbed, the one I recommended for you,
Yeah,
the Echo Timberwolf. It's been a fantastic saw. I've used it more than 99% of people will use a saw in their lifetime, and it held up fantastic. I think I spent $400 on it back in the day. I think
yeah.
the prices went up some, but
I'll, I'll
um,
just I'll just remind people so that you don't have to brag on yourself that Andrew does this for a living. He runs the title I have written down for you is Director of Labor at the Ponderosa Sawmill, which is just him and himself. But he actually does this for a living. So normally, when I look for recommendations for things like this, I go to people who use them 10 times more than I ever will. So yeah, I love my Echo that you recommended for me to buy. I really like it. It's always been good for me. And every time I've started it correctly, it has started on the fourth or fifth pull at the
yeah,
most. So even after sitting for 6 months.
there is nothing more frustrating than a power tool or anything with a motor that you
Yes.
need it to start right now, and it
Yeah.
won't start.
So I'll come into we'll move on from that. One of the biggest things that I would recommend not cheaping out on, but you do not need to go into huge debt on, is any sort of mechanics tools. Please
Yeah,
don't go to Walmart and buy the cheapest stuff on that. You will find it failing. Now, you're not going to use probably, and I'm not going to use maybe all of the ratchets and sockets and wrenches and all that kind of stuff. That's what we're talking about here. We're not going to use it as much as mechanics. I would never recommend anybody unless this is something that you want to do. This is your business here. But don't go into debt on the Snap-on truck or the Matco truck or anything like that. But if you just use Harbor Freight brands, cheap brands, you will find the tolerances on your sockets are not as tight, and you will find yourself actually stripping out more nuts and bolts than you realize in the time that you're actually doing. Um, there are a lot of decent brands that have lifetime warranties that have decent tolerances that are not. And I said Harbor Freight. Harbor Freight Pittsburgh brand is not one that I'd recommend. Harbor Freight Icon brand is about, they're trying to tout it as being on par with Snap-on. I wouldn't go that far, but they do seem to be pretty good. I would also throw out, I used to work at AutoZone, so I have a bunch of Duralast tools, and they've all been really good, and I've really liked them. Craftsman is a great brand on that. Don't cheap out on those and only buy them as you need them. But if you're going to be working on stuff, if you're going to have anything around like older equipment, um, you're going to need those tools and you're going to need them to work and you're going to need them. I would also not cheap out on organization because just throwing all that stuff in the box, you're going to spend more time trying to find it in the box rather than if you spent an extra 30, $40 on some sort of organization thing to keep it all lined out.
Having a tool cart to go along with the mechanics tools, I think, is a helpful thing to
Mm-hmm.
have.
Yeah. Now, if you're not wanting to rebuild cars from scratch or anything like that, which that could be a service on a homestead. If you want to, that be your service that you barter to other people, you go for it and you do whatever you need to do. And you probably know more than I do. But if you're going to need to fix some things yourself. You're not going to want to have everybody do work for you because you're not going to save any money. Spend the time, set up a good tool cart, learn some basics, save you some money. You'll get more confident as you go.
Yeah.
What else you got?
A weed eater. I
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai. This audio was created with Podcastle.ai. This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
A weed eater. I do a lot of weed eating. Um, Part of it is because of my split rail fences. You cannot mow up to the edge perfectly of a split rail fence, even with a zero turn mower, when you build it on hillsides. Um, so I do a lot of fence line trimming. I trim under my electric fence that guards the orchard from deer that are jerks.
Yeah.
And I I use my weed eater in the garden where I can't easily get my mower. So I do a lot of weed eating. If you have a significant amount of yard work that you're going to do, don't cheap out and buy an El Cheapo weed eater or an electric one that's going to poop out after 10 minutes of weed eating, and then you have to
Yeah.
charge it for 24 hours to be able to run it again. Just go ahead and spend the money on a decent one.
This is going to be one of the only things that I'll pretend I know more than you, because currently my other job is landscaping. I am going to only recommend Still. Specifically, there's an FS56. My dad owns it. I own it. And kind of like your chainsaws, I use it more in a week than most people will in a summer.
Yeah.
We drop them. We hit stuff. The only thing you got to replace is the head. They start every time. Don't get a curved shaft. Get a straight shaft. Don't cheap out on it, because, again, if it takes you an hour to do all that work and you've spent 2 hours getting your weed eater ready every time, it's not going to save you any time. It's worth the money to get a nice one straight up.
Yeah.
Before we move on, is there anything else that you would recommend on the buy once, cry once side of things?
Yeah. A shovel and a wheelbarrow. If you are doing a significant amount of garden bed making, harvesting from a garden, I mean, I've used it to haul rocks, wood, like a million things in a wheelbarrow. Buy a good wheelbarrow. And yes, I'm saying wheelbarrow and not wheelbarrow like I should be. I'm not enunciating well anyway. But if you're in rocky, horrible soil, or you are moving a ton of compost or even wood chips, even though it's not ideal, buy you a really good shovel, buy you a really good wheelbarrow, and you will thank yourself instead of having to re-handle that old shovel that the handle keeps breaking on you and it's never quite right and it's dull as could be.
Yep. I'm actually going to talk about some of those things. Some of those garden tools, sometimes it doesn't matter how nice it is. You don't want it to be too nice. If you ever have to burn off any part of your property, the most handy tool you're going to be able to have is a leaf rake, but you might have to really abuse it in the process.
Yeah.
And so you say shovel, and I agree with you, but at the same time, some of these tools, if you spend $100 on a shovel, I don't know if there even is $100 shovel. I'm sure
there is.
Oh, there is. I haven't looked at shovels recently. I just keep picking all mine up at garage sales. We've gone through like 10 leaf rakes in the past 5 years.
Yeah.
Because I'm super hard on them. You can put them out. You can use them to put out fires if you've got a fire on the ground, and you just start beating it with the leaf rake. Is actually one of the easiest ways to put it out, even easier than water sometimes. But we just destroy those things. And so I always, anytime I'm at garage sales or auctions and there's a barrel of yard tools for $5, I'm all over that, because I know we'll go through it and I don't want to spend the money for something I'm going to take out on a fire line and just beat up. And even a couple times we left them out there and forgot about them and ran them over with a mower and stuff like that. It happens. We're trying to be better about it, but it happens.
Yeah.
What are some other things you would not recommend wasting a ton of money on that are not necessarily in that category that most people might think they are in that category.
Oh, chicken brooders,
Mm-hmm.
And chicken coops.
And let's just get into the whole thing: chicken waterers and feeders, because that's
Yeah,
where I'm at.
everything to do with livestock doesn't necessarily have to be the top of the line, high end,
Mm-hmm.
what you see on Instagram stuff. Like, build your own chicken brooder, build your own chicken coop. I don't know who is buying the chicken coops at these farm stores, but they're outrageously priced.
Mm-hmm.
Save yourself some money and it will be better. And if you design it well, it will be more to your liking than the ones you go by.
Mm-hmm. That's another thing is, so with the chickens, the whole thing you got to remember about the chickens is they are providing you, depending on how many you have, they are providing you $6 to $15 of value a week.
Yeah.
In eggs. Is that fair enough? Depending on how many you have.
Yeah, the average backyard flock, that's in the
Yeah.
ballpark.
If you go ahead and immediately go out and drop $2,000 on a chicken coop, how many weeks is it going to be to, and that doesn't count the waters and the feeders and the feed cost and the water cost. And if you happen to have to do any sort of little first aid with them or anything like that, or if you want to get them, if you need to get them any supplements, because sometimes that happens.
Yep.
Just add calcium type stuff or whatever. How long is it going to take you to recoup, pun intended, recoup that investment if you spend $2,000 on a chicken coop and you're getting $6 a week?
It's a really long time, and that's if a raccoon or an owl or a chicken hawk or a bobcat doesn't come terrorize your flock.
Mm-hmm. And so I would really recommend, not build it sturdy, but don't, if you got the money and you're really worried about it, go for the perfect white trim and the cross X on the door and all that stuff. But a solid box will do. I mean, it floors me that people spend so much money just to get $6 eggs every week.
Yeah, the math doesn't add up.
No. So, and that's one of those things that kind of, as you're using it, you can find, you're just going to have to go out there and see where are the animals trying to get in, where are the chickens tearing up, all that kind of stuff. And you just got to go out there and fix it. So you're not going to be able to, even if you spend money and buy a $2,000 chicken coop or whatever, you build one, it's going to get abused. It's going to sit out in the weather. You're going to have to paint it again or whatever else it is. And so think about that. Think about that accordingly. Don't waste your time, waste your money doing that when it's going to have to be modified and it's going to have to be changed. One of the things I found so funny is one of the years that we were at that homesteading expo, they had brought in, I want to say it was like a 16-foot by 40-foot, 48-foot chicken tractor.
Yeah.
It was a monster. It was on like 8 wheels and all this other stuff. You had to hook it up to a tractor or 4-wheeler to move it or whatever. Those beams, as they cross low points in the ground, create all these low points. And even at my house in Kansas, the ground is uneven enough to where those beams can cross low points and animals can get under there.
Yep.
And so you may spend all this money designing and building a chicken coop to find out it just straight up won't work in your area. And then as we talk about that, I think about our struggle with our chicken feeders and our chicken waterers, because we've tried a lot of these different things that we've seen online, and we finally have found out that there's these kits that you drill holes in the side of a 5-gallon bucket, and they have this, would flange be the right word, maybe? That screws into the side, inside and outside of it, that provides a little bit of weather cover for the feed inside to keep it from falling out.
Yeah.
It's a conversion kit. You convert a 5-gallon bucket into a chicken feeder. and we really like those, but then I built these stands for them and they're not that good, and we're going to have to work on them again. So, we're just now finding out what chicken feeders we like and our struggle with the chicken.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai. This audio was created with Podcastle.ai. With Podcastle.ai.
Just now finding out what chicken feeders we like and our struggle with the chicken waters. We've tried all sorts of different things, and we're either out there 100 times a week filling up water, and we finally got a 55-gallon barrel, and now all the fittings are starting to leak and have issues all the time. So we're going to have to kind of go back to the drawing board on that. So it's just, you're going to have to be prepared to tinker. You're going to have to be prepared to modify and be willing to, if you've spent $200 on a chicken waterer and it's not going to work for you, that hurts.
And if you've spent money on something that isn't working out very well, sometimes you chase a bad idea longer than you normally would because you have so much money into it. You feel guilty for it not working.
Yes. And that's the hard thing is that's why I would highly encourage people. I do think, and I do really believe that anything that modifies a 5-gallon bucket in an inexpensive way is what I would recommend.
Yeah.
Starting off with, but just be prepared. You're going to have modifications and stuff done to it. And I'm still working out our kinks on the waterer, and, hopefully maybe someday I'll send you a video to put on your YouTube channel or something of the ultimate chicken waterer, but I still haven't figured it out, and I'm pretty sure nobody has.
It's also very area specific.
Yeah, because if you're farther south than we are and it almost never gets below freezing, then there's all sorts of awesome options. You could leave hoses hooked up to something year round that you could just turn on. And that's kind of comes back. I was going to say this about the buy once, cry once idea. It is worth the time and money and effort to put into these things to save you time on chores.
Yeah.
If you spend even 5 hours one Saturday messing around with chicken waterers and it saves you 15 minutes a day, we're talking about return on investment. That's in here in a few weeks, you've saved yourself all that time and more.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely worth the time to sit there and put in this infrastructure. Now, again, I'd encourage you to be careful with it, but it's worth the time to work out ways to save yourself time.
Yeah, if you're optimizing your chore time, especially for stuff you do daily, watering chickens, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, the faster you can do it, the more time you have to do other projects as well, which matters when you're busy. It matters when you're building. And it's just nice to have time that's not where your whole evening isn't dedicated to homesteading stuff.
Yeah.
When you want to spend time with your family, or the weather's nasty, or people aren't feeling well, or it's the holidays. And so if you optimize everything you can, it's so handy.
And I think that kind of leads us into garden beds, which I know is one thing we kind of wanted to talk about a little bit on this whole. Are they buy once, cry once, or are they modify? Worth the time? Are you going to have to modify them? And I think the answer is yes on both of them.
Yeah. So I started out with this idea because of the internet that raised beds were superior in every way. And like, even the taller your raised beds, the better your soil was, the better off you are. And so I built some tall, 2-foot tall raised beds and had all sorts of issues with them. No one ever took the time to explain your drainage is such that if you build an extremely tall garden bed, it drains so much you have to water extra, especially through the dry parts and in the heat of summer, like what we get here. And so I was having to water, getting poor yields from these beds that the way I built them were not the best use of space either. And so I finally decided I came up with a better design and had to literally tear out like weeks worth of work in building these garden beds to redesign them and redo them in a way that I'm satisfied with now. And so garden beds are something where you are going to um, use them long enough. If you're in the same location, you're going to use them for years and years and years. Build them strong and well designed to the point where you are going to be satisfied with them. When we were at the garden or the Homestead Expo a couple of years ago, one of the sessions on gardening, there was a guy that did this survey. How many of you have been gardening for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, on and on? A few people there had been gardening for 30 years plus. And then he said, how many of you are completely satisfied with how your garden is designed? And the only ones holding their hands up were me and two other people in a crowd of like 200 people.
Yeah.
And that could have been stubbornness partially on my part because I'd put so much work recently into redesigning it. But it just shows that a lot of people are still not happy with their gardens after years and years and years. And so what is the answer to that? Either it's a design problem or it's a location problem. You can't do anything about location, but you can design things well enough to where you're satisfied with the design. You're probably going to realize you did something a certain way, or you could redo something. I would make my walkways about 4 inches wider if I could go back and do it again, but that's a little piddly thing. That's not that big of a deal. Unless you ask my wife, who's getting snagged by tomato vines going between rows in the summertime picking. But overall, if you are going to use something as long as you are at a certain location, like garden beds, take the time to design them right, build them strong, and just do it right the first time. Or you're going to find yourself doing what I did and ripping out weeks and weeks of work and doing it again.
The struggle we've had with garden beds, and we really haven't had just a ton of struggle. Again, you would think out in Kansas, we would have less problems, but again, because it's specific to area, we've had our own share of problems with garden beds. The very first one we put in, we definitely didn't put down enough liner, and it just every year it immediately gets choked out by weeds, and it's a giant pain to keep anything going. We may be ripping that one out and starting all over again. Even though that was a kit that we bought for the walls of them. The simplest thing that we've ended up doing was we end up just stacking 2 courses of concrete blocks and growing in there. We've had good luck with that. We do need to water them a little more often, like you were talking about, but they're not so tall that we have a problem. It's a huge problem. And it's not so tightly packed that water can't get out. Because the other thing that we've done is we've had plants that we put directly in the ground, and sometimes they've been getting flooded out because of the water that's absorbed, because we have very clay soil, or the lack of water being absorbed.
Yeah, you guys needed the drainage in your location.
Yes, yeah. When it comes to putting stuff in the ground, we need drainage, and then we need it to retain when we can. So it's hard. It's kind of a catch-22 of like, do we want drainage? Do we not want drainage? When do we want it? When do we not want it? That kind of thing. And we've had way more luck with the raised beds, although we've been starting to get things to work in the ground directly too. I would highly encourage you. You can get your soil tested through local extension offices. You can just look up extension office near me, and it'll tell you the closest location and which university it's through. We have talked about that before, but definitely check them out for a resource. But one of the things you can do is just fill up a mason jar full of dirt, and then put water in the mason jar, put the lid on it really tight, and then shake it and let it resettle, and you will be able to kind of see how much clay and how much sand you have, and you can amend or make choices accordingly on that.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, gardening, you just have to understand there's not a buy once, cry once solution.
Yeah.
There's not one solution for every, even different properties, even if they're right next to each other, you and your neighbors could still have different trees in the area, different grasses, whatever else it is. There's not one solution, and you got to have to be prepared to work at it, because there are some people, I don't know if they're listening.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
To work at it, because there are.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
To work at it, because there are some people, I don't know if they're listening or not, but there are some people who have enough money to just throw it at the problem until it fixes itself. Gardening is not that hobby.
Yeah.
Gardening is not that skill where you just throw money at it and it gets fixed. It involves work.
And gardening is one of those things where it is very customization and modification heavy. One time, whenever I put in my trellises with my dwarf apple trees, what was that, 4 or 5 years ago, I literally, in a 45-foot span on one of them, hit 3 different soil types just in that short run. And so where you are at is going to have a lot to do with how you do things, and you are going to have to see what's working, what's not working. If you are doing something, though, that is very labor intensive, like putting in your garden beds and stuff, and you've experimented some, I would recommend, if you're starting out, which I think we've talked about this previously, if you're starting out gardening and stuff, do some experimentation in the first year or two, see what works and doesn't work, and then go into making your big design grand garden plot, so you don't do the whole shebang like I did and then change your mind on what would work best for you.
So you would kind of think that's weird to talk about, maybe in a spiritual aspect of your relationship with Christ, being a buy once, cry once situation. Andrew, what do you think about that?
So what kind of came to mind for both of us is Luke 14, where Jesus talks about the cost of discipleship. And I'm going to read 10 verses in a row if everyone doesn't mind. Luke 14, starting in verse 25. Now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, going out to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet one who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is of no use either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown away. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. And so Jesus there is talking about complete devotion to him whenever it comes to discipleship. Christianity is not something that you can do halfway, where you just do it when it's convenient or you do it whenever you're feeling like it. It is complete 100% devotion of Jesus at the expense of everything else in your life. And if you are considering becoming a Christian, this is going to sound kind of backwards and weird, but you need to think about that and what that means and what that's going to look like in your life and whether or not you are serious about it. Because Jesus is pretty strong in his wording. You need to count the cost and think about whether or not you are going to be my disciple. Whenever persecution arose especially in the first century and in many times and ages since then, Um, it did a pretty good job of rendering the fat, so to speak, on whether or not people were serious about being Christians. We do not have that happening currently in our culture, in our country today, but we still need to ask ourselves the same question. Are we serious about following Jesus? Are we going to follow him at the expense of everything else? And
Mm-hmm.
if not, we've got some hard questions to ask ourselves and some big decisions to make.
One of the things about counting the cost is we're going to have to understand that I feel like people use this as an excuse so many times. They talk about, people want to use their jobs as an excuse to not follow Christ, but not to, well, I've got work tomorrow. I can't come to Wednesday service or Sunday evening service or whatever the case may be. And they're like, well, God wants me to provide for my family. He does. That point is made very clear in so many other places, but it's really hard when you just keep constantly giving up church for your job. The question is, are you really more interested in continuing to work on worldly things, or are you more interested in working on spiritual things? And that's part of what this counting the cost is. You know, we may not be thrown in jail or anything, but you may not be able to take that promotion at work because it may mean that you have to work on Sundays all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
You may not be able to take that promotion, and they may have to pass you up, and you're going to have to say, yeah, I'll be able to live on a little less because God will still provide for me anyway. And that's something that people, they're not willing sometimes they use this idea of God wanting him to provide for my family as an excuse. As long as they're fed and cared for, they don't have to have 3 vacations and dance lessons and everything else. I mean, Christians have been getting by without that stuff for years. We got to
Yeah.
make sure that when we're looking at the cost, we're looking at what is God actually asking of us? What is God commanding us to provide for our families? Not what is what do we think our families need to be provided, and then say, well, that's what God wants me to do.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting that whenever he starts this passage section, however you want to split that up there, in verse 26 in Luke 14, he zeroes in specifically from the get-go on family. And he goes the full gamut of father, mother, wife, children, brothers, and sisters. I mean, that covers everyone, even closer than cousins. And says, and even himself after that. And so I have experience, I think you have some experience as well, with people putting their family ahead of God whenever the rubber meets the road.
Mm-hmm.
And worship is an easy example. There's family that's come in from out of town, and people will skip worship to spend time with the family that came in from out of town.
Yeah, because God wants me to spend time with my family.
Yeah, and I mean, we both love our families dearly. We love our wives, we love our kids, we love our parents and our siblings. But if we put any of those people above Jesus, then we have not counted the cost the way he told us to. And he says flat out, if you put those people ahead of me, you cannot be my disciple.
Mm-hmm.
And so that should really make us question where we have prioritized Jesus in comparison to the people that are in our lives that influence our decisions.
And the other reason I'm so passionate about this concept and this idea is because it's not only what you need to do for God, but it's also the best thing you can do for your family.
Absolutely.
Because I've had so many people, so many friends that I grew up with in the church who they were there at 95% of the services, but they just saw their parents willing to give up this service, that service, the other service. And it wasn't very many. It was like 3 or 4 a year, one for hunting season, just one. It's not a big deal if you can't tell over the podcast. I'm being a little sarcastic. Just one for hunting season. We just all go up and we have our service at hunting season. Well, I got called into work a couple times. We were on vacation and we didn't go to service. It's okay. And that had translated drastically into, well, service is only important when I think it's important, and it starts to become not important at all.
Yeah. I think it was your dad in a Bible class a few weeks ago. It might have been.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
I think it was your dad in a Bible class a few weeks ago. It might have been Eric.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
I think it was your dad in a Bible class a few weeks ago. It might have been Eric. I can't remember which one it was, but they said if you find an excuse to not come to a few worship services, your kids will find an excuse, and I'm paraphrasing heavily, your kids will find an excuse not to come to half the worship services, and their children won't come to any.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of a general proverb, but I've seen it hold true where people start making sacrifices. The kids are going to pick up on that, and they're going to take that a whole lot further.
Yep. Further than you do, whether you realize it or not. So one of the things, though, I did want to also talk about in this is, as silly as this sounds, this buy once, cry once idea is something that doesn't really sound like it would apply to Christianity. But one of the things that I think about is so many Christians are faced with some sort of addictions, whether it's, and we automatically are going to point to like drinking and smoking, but even we're addicted to pornography, which is bad, but we're also, we're addicted to food, or we're addicted to everything being on our time, on our terms. There's a lot more things that I would classify as addictions than maybe I'm a little more liberal in my definition on that. But it is worth the time to purge yourself of those addictions immediately before they start to infect every aspect of your life. Otherwise you're going to have to keep coming back to it. We're kind of talking about, as silly as it is, we were talking about the rakes earlier. Well, I'm not really a big fan of spending a bunch of money on the rake because I know I'm going to break it and I'm going to have to buy another one anyway. Well, I don't feel like your addictions that I think it's easy to feel that way about them. Well, I'm just going to come back to it anyway. So as long as I just try to keep myself mostly off of it, it's not a big deal, but it continues to infect you and wear you down slowly and slowly in ways that you don't realize, because you're living as part of that.
Yeah.
And so this is a situation where it's a buy once, cry once. I would highly recommend whatever you have to do to get yourself away from those addictions. It's worth it to do it right now before it corrupts your Christian life in a way that you can't possibly imagine at this time.
Yeah, and that made me think of Hebrews 12, the first two verses. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. That part about setting aside or lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. I think what you were describing there is summed up in the every weight and sin which clings so closely. Maybe something isn't just a drop dead, cut and dry sin, but it is a weight which is preventing you from running the race the way that you should. It's time to get rid of that, whatever it takes.
I agree. One of the verses, and I feel like people take this out of context or don't understand this verse so much. So I kind of want to spend a little bit of time, making sure that we really hit it correctly and appropriately. One of those verses is 1 Corinthians 10:13. I want to start by emphasizing it says, no temptation. Temptation is not sin. It is the leading to sin. So no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. So often people look at that verse and say, no, and they think no sin has overtaken you that is not common to man, and God will not allow you to sin beyond your ability. So if it, they just feel like their sins are so common, but we're talking about temptations here. And the problem with any of these addictions is that it's based in a constant temptation.
Yeah.
It's not like a crime of passion that something happens once randomly that's never happened before and going to never happen again or anything like that. These are little, they may be bigger, but they're little daily things that are just constantly hitting you. And there is a way out of it. It's not so far and away that you can't work out of it, that you can't get out of it. There is a way of escape provided for you out of the temptation. And so that verse is not justifying your sin because everybody else has done it. That verse is giving you strength to know, even when that temptation seems constant and seems minuscule but constant, or maybe it seems bigger or constant, there is always a way out of it.
What you were talking about with temptation not equaling sin made me think of James 1:12 through 15. For the sake of time, we'll just look at 15 really quick. Then desire, which is the temptation, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. The temptation doesn't equal sin there is really well laid out in that section. And anything you can do to prevent temptation, it's one of those situations where an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. The less times you have to say no to temptation, the easier it is to say no whenever it pops up.
And so I'd encourage you, that's definitely one of those situations where don't view your sin as just inevitable. It's something I'm going to come back to. It's, I just got to learn to live with it. It's something you got to fix. A silly example, but a friend of mine here recently, here about 8 or 9 months ago, he tore his ACL. And he just didn't have the time right then to, go into surgery. They said it might be a couple months on the healing process, all that. He didn't have a chance to do it. So he kind of learned to live with it. And he was doing a lot of the same stuff he normally did, and he was doing pretty good. And he felt like he could learn to live with it. But then just every once in a while, it really start to affect him in ways and times that he was not ready for, and times he didn't know it was going to come up and hit him. It hit him. And so we finally talked him in, hey, you need to get this surgery done. Even though it's painful and annoying at the time, it's going to make the rest of your life easier, and it's going to put you in a better shape to handle these things. And that's how this sin is, in my opinion. That's how this sin truly is it's worth the time. It's worth the time to deal with it now, because you don't understand how much better your life can be when you have it out.
Absolutely.
Anything else that we need to cover?
I think that wraps it up pretty well.
All right. I think this is going to be one of our most concise, short episodes. You want to talk about tools some more?
I thought we might keep it under an hour, and then we started talking, and I was like, I don't think there's much of a shot of that happening.
Yeah. Well, I think we're both so self-conscious about not getting lost in arguing about tools that we didn't do it at all. So we'll let the audience decide. This may be our highest rated episode yet because it was so short. It may end up. Maybe everybody wants us to go another hour. So you can let us know. through our, we do have a Gmail address. I'll go ahead and throw that in right here at the end. It is 5acreparables@gmail.com, but that's a number 5. So the number 5acreparables@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook. I can't say X. I have to say Twitter, but Twitter/X, Instagram. And if you know us personally, I'm sorry, but you could also just tell us. And we're grateful for any input and any support. If you have a chance to maybe leave a rating on our podcast or whatever it is that you could do, share it. We'd be grateful. Anything else you want to say, Andrew, before we close for the night?
Nope. Just thanks if you made it this far listening to us.
All right. Well, this has been the 5 Acre Parables podcast. Thank you very much.
You have been listening to the 5 Acre Parables podcast.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.